going to sound a little like it's been read, and it is. So I'm pleased to introduce this evening's presenter, Carolyn Wilcox. Carolyn holds a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in environmental science. Her employment with NatureBridge, formerly the Olympic Park Institute, led her to move to Port Angeles. She also worked with the U.S. Geological Survey as a member of the Elwha River Wildlife Research Team prior to the removal of the Elwha Dam. Carolyn was first exposed to ornithology as an undergraduate in 1998 and has been obsessed with birds ever since. Although she has studied birds in a scientific capacity, Carolyn prefers to study birds as a naturalist, birding guide, and loves to point out birds to people. She learned to bird by ear in the late 1990s with the Missouri Forest Ecosystem Project, where she conducted an auditory transit maps of neotropical migratory songbirds, set up mist nets, banded birds, and searched for nests. In 2011, Carolyn worked to improve her raptor ID skills with the Hawkwatch International through migratory raptor data collection in Utah. Carolyn has traveled down under to both Australia and New Zealand with Youth for Understanding in high school. Since then, she has taught and traveled extensively in Costa Rica and Mexico, as well as traveled a bit in Canada, Central America, the Bahamas and Bermuda, United Kingdom, Europe, and Africa. Here on the Olympic Peninsula as a birder, Carolyn has been concentrating on seabird and shorebird identification and is also working to better understand old growth forest indicator species like the spotted owl and marbled murrelet to share this research with participants. Carolyn is the owner and operator of Experience Olympic Tours, established in 2013, which offers eco tours, marine tours, and birding tours in and around the Olympic National Park. Tonight, Carolyn will present part one of her program, Birdscaping. Part two will be offered next Tuesday, the 21st at 7 p.m. via Zoom. With that, Thursday.
Thursday, thank you.
Little typo there. Sarah didn't proofread this for me, so anyway. With that, I give you Carolyn. Carolyn, you're up.
Thank you, Steph. That was such a kind introduction that was very detailed, much better than I would have come up with. And thank you, Patty, for helping to coordinate everything and set this up. I'm just really happy to be here. And I'm going to try to keep myself to an hour. So I just set my timer, and I think it would be best if we leave questions until the end. And if you need more time on a slide, because I do have some of them with a lot of plant names on it, maybe we should just wait until the end, and then we can always go back to any of the slides, just to keep time and make sure that we get through the presentation in case people want to go to sleep or they have something else going on. So we're going to start the show here, and I'm just going to get my settings so I can see. And if everyone could mute themselves, that would be also fantastic. Birdscaping introduction, how and why to invite native birds and plants into your yard. And with each slide, I also want to just talk a little bit about what birds we're looking at and kind of what we're looking at here. So we're looking at a downy woodpecker here, which can very easily be confused with a hairy woodpecker, which I have on the next slide. But based on the smaller bill size, the downy is also a smaller bird, but I usually kind of look at the bill, and if the bill looks like it could really do some damage, then it's probably a hairy, and they're also much bigger. If it's just a very petite little bill, then it's a downy, and downy are usually more common. Like where I am, I'm very close to downtown Port Angeles, so we only have downy, we don't have hairy, so I have to travel a little bit closer to Olympic National Park in order to get the hairy woodpecker, which is pictured here at the bottom. And so you can see that much larger bill, but otherwise the coloration is very, very similar. And then up top, we have a red-breasted nuthatch. And unfortunately, compared to like when I lived in Spokane, where we had like a variety of nuthatches, this is lamentably our only nuthatch species that we have here on the Olympic Peninsula. So the outline is we're going to talk about the 3 billion birds lost as sort of just why we're interested in increasing bird habitat. We're going to talk about just a little bit about native birds, what defines them. And then this talk, we're going to talk about food and water as the elements of habitat. And then in the next talk, we're going to talk about shelter and space. So the next one is going to have a lot more landscaping features. And we're also going to talk a lot more about birds as well. And then native plants, we'll talk about native plants and give you some examples of some that work really well here in your yard. And then cats and windows, and we'll probably go through some of that fairly quickly because you're probably mostly familiar with that. And then also critter concerns. So our collective feeder and garden decisions make a difference. And the Anna's hummingbird is a very good example of it. And the Anna's hummingbird, these are both males. The Anna's hummingbird is the one with the red head and on the left, and then on the right is the Rufous hummingbird male. And he does not have the really beautiful gorget on his head. So he doesn't have that added color on his head. And he also has the rufous color. It's a little easier to tell, of course, with any hummingbird, the males from the females. You start getting females and it's a lot more of a headache. But, you know, we don't have that many hummingbird species here. So this is fairly easy. But essentially the Anna's hummingbird was more so a California bird and has been able to just basically move up the coast and is kind of expanding its range even to other locations because it's been able to overwinter. So the Rufous hummingbird migrates, and I don't see the males after a certain time. I pretty much only see them in the spring. I usually have a Rufous female that builds a nest somewhere nearby, and I continue to see her. I can usually continue to see a Rufous visiting our good pollinator flowers. And then I just don't see them at all. And whereas the Annas are still around, and you know, they always are, they're always like kind of, I mean, they're very kind of in your face birds, as you probably all know. So the Annas is a great example where if we didn't have all this amazing habitat for them to overwinter, it would be unlikely that they would expand their range this far. So the mantra, let's bring birds back. So we've got almost 3 billion birds gone since 1970. And there's 7 simple actions that have been recommended to try to address this problem. This is definitely a problem that we can solve given, you know, what we've done for wetlands and ducks and hawks and other bird species. So we can definitely solve this problem, but we just need to make sure that people are aware of it and that they, you know, understand that non-native birds that visit your feeder are not the same and are not necessarily the birds that we want to be concentrating on. And we especially don't want them to monopolize the habitat. So some of the actions, and we're not going to talk about all of these, but like drink shade-grown coffee. We've started doing that and just put in a big order for it. Reduce plastic use, something that we're all trying to do, and there's, you know, a lot of plastic bag bans and so forth to kind of try to get at that. Do citizen science, you know, of course, doing the eBird. You know, the Pigeon Guillemot study that you guys started and all of that. Make windows safer. We are going to talk about that. Keep cats indoors. We'll address that. use native plants, that's what the talk is about, and then avoid pesticides, which we're going to address that more in the next talk, actually. So I just want to break down like that, there's certain birds that we really need to be concentrating on. And so we're first going to look at boreal forest birds. So we have lost 9 and 10 evening grosbeaks since 1970. So 500 million boreal forest birds lost. And these are some of the species that I have in my yard and that you might have in yours as well. So we've got the dark-eyed junco, evening grosbeak, hermit thrush, ruby-crowned kinglet, yellow-rumped warbler, orange-crowned warbler, golden-crowned sparrow, and fox sparrow. So I've been working really hard to try to improve habitat, especially for these birds and especially for my ground feeding sparrows. They're really vulnerable also with the cats and so forth. So then we have aerial insectivores. These are great beneficial birds. We definitely want them around because they're going to eat mosquitoes and other insects that are around during the summer. There's 2 and 5 barn swallows have been lost since 1970, and a total of 160 million birds lost since 1970. And some of these species include barn swallow, violet green swallow, tree swallow, purple martin, box's swift, and common nighthawk. So these are some of the examples of these aerial insectivores. And I've been really focused on the violet green swallow because it is a species that is really totally fine with a nest box on your house. And I've been able to find a location, and it took quite a few years to figure out exactly what they wanted. I basically ignored like height and orientation and all of that, and I just basically put it in a spot where there was nothing in front of the box, where it was just open on the very front of my house, like basically over the walkway in the front of my house. And they love it, and the house sparrows are always trying to get into it. And in fact, there's a downy woodpecker that I think wants to roost in it, which I'm a little nervous about because I haven't cleaned it out, because I usually clean it in the spring, but it's probably better to clean it earlier. And so if they do increase the size of it, which I'm okay with, but that means I need to fix that before the violet green swallows come, because otherwise the house sparrows will definitely nest in there. So so these things are kind of tricky, but definitely worthwhile, and it makes you a better observer of what the birds are up to. So a native species is part of the balance of nature that has evolved in a particular region or ecosystem. And pictured here is a chestnut-backed chickadee, and which is, especially as a bird guide, like this is a bird that, everyone wants to see. They want to get a good view of the chestnut-backed chickadee. It's a little hard because unless the bird is in fairly good light, it's sometimes a little bit hard to see that chestnut color. So it is really helpful if you can find a feeder, because they are very good about coming to the feeder. And we have both chestnut-back and black-capped that share the habitat that's in our yard. And then on the right here is ruby-crowned kinglet, and I have not seen one return yet, so I'm still kind of looking out for. Usually we have at least one ruby-crowned kinglet that comes for the winter and hangs out in our yard. So an ecosystem includes all the living and non-living parts of the natural world. And so we just want to kind of keep that in mind. And we also want to keep in mind the trophic pyramid. that at the base you have producers, and you have more producers than anything else. And then you have the primary consumers, or the herbivores. And so this is really important when we think about native plants, because basically we're increasing these primary consumers. So it is good to have lots of insects in our yard, because that is a primary food source for the songbirds. So you want to have lots of these insects, and the insects are very usually very specialized. So they're not general eaters. So they're not just going to eat grass, for example. They're going to be adapted to eat a particular plant. And then secondary consumers are our songbirds that we're focused on, but we're also in the process of feeding the secondary consumers. We're also helping to feed the tertiary consumers. So those are like the accipiters, like the sharpshin and the Cooper's hawk, that want to come in and eat the songbirds. So that's definitely something that you have to keep in mind, that you're also feeding them as well. So on that topic, birds are both predators and prey. And so these are taken from either in our yard or near our yard. So on the left is a merlin, and which is a falcon. So it's got a little bit different shape, much shorter tail, and usually very hard to identify, because by the time you realize they're there, they're gone. And then a Cooper's hawk on the right, which is usually, we have had Sharpies, but oftentimes it is the Cooper's hawk, and it's usually juvenile birds too that come through. So we're gonna talk about habitat, so food, which includes native plants, and water, and just thinking about birds and what they eat, even though it might overlap a lot when you're feeding them. There's also, what comprises the majority of their diet, and especially what comprises their diet when they're breeding. So, during the winter, it's an easier time to feed them, because, they're just trying to get enough calories to kind of stay warm, and or to continue on their migration. So the yellow warbler here is on the left, and these are both yellow birds, but very different in different groups. And notice that very thin, straight bill, so very good for eating insects. And then the American goldfinch is on the right, and it has a very conical bill, good for eating seeds. And so both yellow birds, and my neighbor, I think he's referring to the goldfinches. He calls them canaries, but I pretty much know what he's talking about. These are kind of, I guess, the canary birds. So when compared to native plants, feeders are more so for our enjoyment of the birds. So this kind of took me a while to kind of get this, but now that I own my own home, and can have more access to what is in my yard, I really have seen that, because when I was renting, it was more feeders were kind of the only thing that I could do, and had the capacity to do. So it's really, really fulfilling to see the birds use the habitat that you've created. So here on the left is a female Anna's, and also another female Anna's is feeding at the hummingbird feeder. And then there's another male Rufus that's perched atop a willow. So different feeder designs and different types of food attract different species of birds. So when we had the pine siskin eruption all last year, I really had to get creative, because I did want to continue feeding birds, but I definitely did not want to feed the finches, because there was just really no way to do that safely, because of the way that the siskins were descending and just, eating. And so, I really found that the finches in general do not like suet and do not like peanuts. And so that's mainly what I was feeding in order to kind of avoid that disease and getting them into close quarters. And so this pine siskin is on the left side. And then on the right side is, can't really see because of this little thing, just a minute here, is a ruby crown kinglet. And you don't normally get to see them this close up to be able to tell them apart from a Hutton's vireo, but the ruby crown kinglet does have those nice yellow feet. So if you are able to see that, that is a nice feature that differentiates them. So ground feeders use platform feeders. And so even though they're more comfortable on the ground, they will come up to a platform feeder. Even the fox sparrow, which is pictured on the bottom left, which looks very much like a song sparrow. But notice that the fox sparrow, the bottom of the bill is yellow, and on the song sparrow, it doesn't have quite as conical of a bill, and it's kind of uniformly gray. They have some other differences, but that's one that is helpful for identifying the two. And then the towhee, male towhee, beautiful bird in the top left, and then the junco top right. And I'm really excited to report that we had juncos nesting in our yard for the first time last summer, and I really think it's because of a brush pile that we created, and I'm going to talk about that more in my next talk. So flickers eat ants about 45% of their diet, or they'll eat suet. The big thing with flickers is I have the best luck with this feeder here on the left, which is a large capacity suet feeder. It's also called like the suet palace. And the little birds can get in, and then the woodpeckers hang on the bottom. And for the most part, some starlings can hang on, but for the most part, it is pretty starling proof. And then we can go into like flickers. Flickers are red shafted, typically in the west, yellow shafted in the east. But here, because we have migrating flickers coming through, they overlap up north where you get both yellow shafted and red shafted. So we do get a lot of combo birds that have some features of yellow shafted, like the red behind the nape, but they have other features that look like red shafted, like their face is sometimes still fairly brown. Like this, the female up in the right feeding the nestling looks like a pretty standard red shafted. And I'm not sure if they're still calling these intergrades or not, but we definitely get a lot of those coming through. I don't think I've ever seen pure yellow shafted. It seems like there's always some like combination differences. So warblers prefer insects, but dine on suet, bark butter, jam, sugar water, the same proportion 1 to 4, the 1 part sugar and the 4 parts water, and fine sunflower chips. So we have had overwintering Townsend's warblers pretty much every winter since we moved in. And so it's just been an experiment to try to better feed them. And so this feeder down at the bottom is actually an oriole feeder, and it's kind of annoying, but what I've ended up doing is filling the little containers where you're supposed to put like jam or jelly with nectar, and the hummingbirds will drink it all too. It's like they get kind of aggressive even with the warblers. It's like they know that they're taking their food away. But you usually have to refill that kind of on a daily basis. But it's kind of annoying to have to redo that, and you do have to kind of wash it out because otherwise it looks kind of gross. So it's kind of a daily kind of thing, but it definitely is very popular for not only the Townsends, but also the orange crown warbler and also the ruby crown kinglet too. So you can also consider spicy food that mammals do not like, or use no mess, so no hull in the seed, so that food cannot be cached by rodents for very long. So if you do have a situation where you have no other options for finishing the food or whatever, these are just some things that the mammals typically do not like, the spicy food. And if you have no mess, then at least if they do get a hold of any, they can't really cache it. So it just helps with kind of rodent control. Oops. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my controls. So the three concerns when feeding birds are, and this is a little crass, so I apologize, cover, critters, and crap. And so this picture is a failed attempt at keeping a starling off the food. So a lot of this is design when it comes to barriers to try to feed the birds that you want to feed and keep out the birds that you don't. So cover, roofs with adequate overhang protect food from potentially toxic mold. And so this platform feeder actually now has some other features on it, like a baffle, and it actually has wires to keep out the Eurasian collared doves. But it does show that the cover, and I actually did have to replace the roof because it was getting so much use that it was starting to kind of wear out. And then critters, you want to definitely make sure to place a baffle below feeders to stop the critter access. So you can see on the left, the raccoon has been baffled, whereas in the middle, before I got a baffle, you can see the Douglas squirrel, which I don't mind feeding the Douglas squirrel, but I do mind feeding the rats, and anywhere probably that the squirrel can get, the rat might be able to get too, as you can see on the right. And then you want to make sure to clean your feeders every time you fill them. If you ever notice sick birds, you want to decontaminate and remove food sources. And by far and large, the birds that I see with the most disease issues are the house finches. So you definitely want to watch your finch population carefully because they really show a lot of visual signs if there's disease about. So bird baths, drip irrigation, plates, or shallow bowls filled with pebbles all provide water and should be cleaned when refilling. And so you can see on the bottom here on the right, this is a goldfinch that, the goldfinches especially really like my water source, and, they get very upset if there's no water. So I was like kind of in the middle of cleaning things, and this goldfinch just was like, where's my water? And then in the top left is a pine siskin, and then in the bottom is a juvenile robin. So bird baths should be at least 1 inch deep, but no more than 3 inches deep. And birds are really picky. Like, we had a fountain in one location, nobody came to it. We had to kind of move it closer to where there's cover, and then they were fine with it. So you really just have to test out different locations. And, of course you want to put it where you can view it, because that's the whole point. But you just might have to not put something in a place permanently until you see like what fears or, what the birds are going to do about it, because they're definitely very cautious, and they're very cautious about changes. So you kind of have to be patient and let them kind of find that there's no risk to whatever it is that has changed. So here on the left is a evening grosbeak, which I wish we had evening grosbeaks, but again, it's kind of like the hairy woodpecker. I'm not quite close enough to Olympic National Park to get them. And then cedar waxwings, a lot of people's bird, their spark bird that really gets them into birding. And then a chestnut-back chickadee in the bottom. And then also notice the rock. I don't know if that rock is necessarily a good example, but rocks to allow pollinators to get a drink of water is also a really good idea because you can give them water as well. So bird baths should have gently sloping sides and a rough surface. And so these are orange crown warblers, and the moving water is really attractive to especially like warblers and hummingbirds that otherwise often don't visit still water. So now we're going to move on to plants. So about 70% of breeding birds in the Pacific Northwest feed on mostly insects, and insects prefer to feed on native plants. So this is really important to understand that most insects are not generalists. So if you have a lot of plants that are cultivars or nursery plants or European plants or wherever they come from, they are not going to be appealing to as many insects as those that have evolved with our insect population. And so especially if you're considering like butterflies, you can consider, what does the caterpillar eat? Oftentimes that's different than what the adult butterfly feeds on, if they feed at all, because some don't really have feeding parts. So it really just depends. But all of these things are kind of important, and the native plants in regards to the insects, which is what the birds are largely eating, is important. This is salmonberry, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend planting unless you have kind of a wild area, since it is a little bit more of a wild spreader. And I do try to talk about which have a tendency to spread, but it is a very beautiful plant, and it goes through a lot of interesting changes. So it's both attractive with the flowers, and especially with the rufous hummingbirds, and then also the fruit as well. So you want to aim for about 70%, ideally as much as possible, of native plants in your yard. And so here's 6 native shrubs for your Pacific Northwest garden. So in the top left is salal, going clockwise is ocean spray, and then red flowering currant that also has the bumblebee on it. And then Indian plum, red osier dogwood, and evergreen huckleberry. And so I've also written these down on this slide. You have salal, and I have been doing a lot of experimenting with transplanting. I have not had success when I have bought salal or tried to transplant it in a pot. But when I have gone to a friend's house who has a lot of salal, and then what I do is in the fall, like areas where, especially where the salal is growing into a pathway or somewhere where it isn't already growing, you'll see these runners, these like just very stark white roots that are growing out of a patch into a new space. And those have transplanted really wonderfully. So if you can kind of find that new salal growth, it's a really good way to transplant. And then ocean spray is a common shrub for bush tit nest building, and it's also a big pollinator attractor. Red flowering currant blooms at the same time rufous hummingbirds arrive during spring migration. And it also, what's really nice is it's easily propagated by staking, which means that if you make cuttings of the currant during the dormant period, so when it doesn't have any leaves or flowers, so in the winter sometime, and then you just stick it in the ground, it often just starts growing roots, and then you can help it along a little and then put it where you want it. Indian plum is usually dioecious, which means that it has separate male and female plants, and since it does create this wonderful fruit, but only on the female plants, you just want to keep that in mind, that the female plants are going to be a little bit more helpful with feeding the birds if you want to feed them the fruit. So in other words, just make sure that you plant more than one, or that you have more than one around for cross-pollination. Red osier dogwood is also propagated by staking. And then evergreen huckleberry, just a warning, it's very slow growing. So you just kind of have to keep that in mind. So this is put out by Washington State University Rain Garden. And I just think it has like a nice variety of plants. So I just wanted to go over those really quickly. So shrubs includes red flowering currant and the red osier dogwood, which we already talked about, Pacific ninebark and black twinberry, which both definitely like moisture, and I've just planted them actually. So I'll have to report back on how they do later. Root spreaders include the Douglas spirea, the tall Oregon grape, the salmonberry, and the snowberry. Perennial flowers include the showy fleabane, common camas, stream violet, western columbine, and California aster. I have started both the Erigeron speciosus and the Symphytotrichum chilense. I'm sure I butchered those as seeds. And so they were pretty easy to start from seeds. And then deer fern, which I haven't found a good source of deer fern. So I mostly have sword fern and lady fern, but I would like some deer fern in the future. Slough sedge, which I've had great success with. And I actually found that at the local nursery. It was pretty easy to find. And then taper tip rush, which I don't have, but I think I would really like that one too. So, and we can come back to this slide, so. And then native plants occur in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat, and native plants and animals depend on each other. So this is a picture on the left of a flycatcher, and they only just visit our yard briefly, usually. And then
Carolyn,
yeah.
we are still seeing rain garden native plant species. We're not seeing the new slide.
Uh-oh. Okay. Do you see it now?
No, it's still the rain garden.
It says my screen sharing is paused. Resume share. Okay. Oop.
Now we're back to the beginning.
I don't know how that happened. Let me just find. Well, maybe I should do a new share because I'm not really.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Technology happens. Kind of frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole thing kind of froze on me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna have to just reopen the program. So sorry about that. Let's see, what can we, does anyone have any questions on what we already talked about?
Anyone? Are you still trying to open it?
I have
Yeah,
a question.
Go
great.
ahead.
You mentioned some types of birds who liked bark butter, and I'm wondering, what is bark butter?
It's a rather expensive product that I have found at Wild Birds. I think it's kind of a Wild Birds exclusive kind of thing. I haven't really found it anywhere else, but it's basically a more expensive form of peanut butter that also has some, I think, just like probably corn or something mixed in it. So it has a little bit more of a spreadable consistency and it isn't super oily.
Hello. I have a comment about the ocean spray.
Oh, great.
I have a lot in my yard, and I've noticed that especially the chickadees, but a lot of other birds just love the little seeds that come out in in the fall. I mean, they're all over the place. Even I've seen some I can't remember right now what other birds I've seen, but yeah, they really do love the seeds of that too. So
There we go.
Sounds good. All right, you got it.
Yeah, well, I've never had that happen, but when in doubt, always shut it down, right?
Right.
Okay, so we are back to native plants occur in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat, and native plants and animals depend on each other. So on the left, we have a flycatcher, and on the right, we have a white-crowned sparrow, and these are both in native plants. So the on the left, the flycatcher is in a madrone, and on the right, the white-crowned sparrow is on a plant that I've planted called coastal mugwort. It's a type of artemisia. And so, and I've really enjoyed having, and actually I was able to successfully transplant a madrone, which I'd read you're not able to do, but now that I've protected it from the deer because they started eating the leaves, which I didn't think they were supposed to do, but isn't that the story with deer? I now have both of these plants growing, which I'm excited about. So native plants support 10 to 15 times more wildlife species than non-native plants. So this is another one that's a little hard to find, the flowering dogwood. So that's why I think a lot of times people recommend red osier dogwood instead. But the red osier dogwood doesn't make these beautiful berries that the birds love to eat. So I did also try transplanting a native dogwood, but I just got one from my friend and we both transplanted one. So we'll see what happens if they're able, because they're supposed to be kind of also tricky to transplant. So we'll kind of have to see how it goes. These are basically, you can't find the native in the nurseries because I believe they're really susceptible to disease. And so they usually offer a cross instead. So you might want to just take them up on that cross because the hybrid, I think, is less susceptible to disease. You want to choose straight native plant species, not cultivars, as a general rule, but sometimes you have to deal with hybrids, and opt for local options first. So this is evening grosbeak eating serviceberry, which is another plant that I'm really excited that I got some from the Conservation District sale, which I'm going to talk more about. So we're going to talk more about this in the next talk, but reduced lawn space, good shelter, plant layers, and no pesticides are also very important. And so This is not the native columbine, and I'm pretty sure cornflower is not native. And the rhodie that the rufous hummingbird is sitting in is a cultivar as well. But as you can see, these birds are still enjoying these species. So even though it's always best to have natives, if you do already have mature plants or plants that you notice that the wildlife is enjoying, then arguably to a certain extent, you might want to just keep some of that habitat and not do everything all at once. So native plants are less resource intensive, and you want to plant them in the fall, including most native seeds like lupin, because they often need a stratification period. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But on the left here is a Lincoln sparrow, and on the right is a common yellowthroat. And these are bird species that you would only be able to attract to your yard based on habitat. Like you would not be able to attract these birds based on feeding. Like you would not really see them at a feeder, as far as I know. So now is the time to order native plant seeds, and you want to seed them now. And I've had the best of luck with just a typical gallon pot that you just, put soil in, and then you put the seeds in, you stick it outside at this time of year, let it overwinter, and then ideally your plants start popping up in the spring, or sometimes even in the summer. You don't want to rush them because you don't know exactly what they need to get germinated and get going. Some of the lily species that I have, like it might take them 5 years to germinate. So I don't know how that's going to work, but I'm willing to experiment with it. And stratification is basically just the natural process of heating and cooling that the seeds need to go through in order to protect them so that they don't germinate and start growing at the wrong time of year. So it's like a kind of like an insurance policy for the seed so that it grows when it's supposed to. And so it's you can basically mimic that by putting seeds in the refrigerator. I've done it that way, or you just put them outside, which I think is a lot easier. So Inside Passage Seeds is one company that you can order native seeds from, and their information is here. And I took this from their website. There is widespread awareness of the role of native species in restoring damaged landscapes. And then Northwest Meadowscapes is another one, and their quote that they had on their website was, "Humanity's work should complement nature." So I wanted to give a shout out to both of those companies, and I've ordered seeds from both of them. And then coming up for you on Whidbey Island is the Whidbey Island Conservation District plant sale, where you can get bare root native trees and shrubs. And so bare root is a way to get plants a little bit more inexpensively because you don't have to deal with pots or soil. And so basically the plants are healed in some way into a garden space, and then they are dug up with usually very good root systems in the early spring. And so you can see that pre-ordering begins in November and runs through January, while plant pickup is in late February. And from their website, I just wanted to include that native plants improve our water quality, reduce soil and wind erosion, clean the air, reduce energy costs, attract and support local wildlife, and enhance your property. So big shout out to the Conservation District. Thank you. And then you can also get potted native plants, although the issue with potted native plants is that, you usually have to buy them when it's not the best time to plant them. So what I do with my potted native plants is I wait until essentially this time of year, and I'm a little behind, so I still have a lot of potted plants. And then I get them out all in the fall at some point. And we have such mild winters that, you know, really you can kind of put them in practically at any time, unless you know, you have snow on the ground and you can't really easily get to the ground, but you can pretty much put them in any time. And these are just some different nurseries. The only one that I have familiarity with is Plantis nativa. And I have had very good experience with all the plants that they sold me. I ended up over in Mount Vernon at a restore because I was we were gathering materials for a greenhouse that we now have, and they happen to have a satellite store there, and so I just went crazy and I was so excited, and I got all these native plants, and it was just a lot of species that I haven't been able to find around here. So it was pretty exciting. So I definitely enjoyed that, and I'm really excited about, like, I got like 3 different species of spirea that I'm excited to try. So moving on to cats. Keep all birdscaping installations like food and water away from cats. A study by the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute reported that between 1.4 billion and 3.7 billion birds are killed each year by cats roaming outdoors. Basically, all I have to do, because my spouse will chase the cats, is open the door and the cats run off our property. So they still try to come because the birds, but they know, like, as soon as the door opens, like, they run away. So they know that they are not what we were feeding. So cat predation is a major threat to bird populations, especially those already on decline due to habitat loss. And I think, and I've seen more and more of these around town, are catios. And a lot of people start feeding birds in order to entertain their cats. And I think that's great. And I love cats and I love dogs. But, you know, I just, you know, we're not losing, you know, billions of, you know, of these species. There's plenty of domesticated animals around. We are losing our songbird species. So that is, to me, what the priority is. So you want to move your feeders closer to or further away from windows and place stickers or other objects on the outside of problem windows. Because one of the other big things, and this is part of the 3 billion birds lost, is to make your windows safer. So there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but it's really important to identify these problem windows and just be aware. You can suspend mylar balloons, plastic strips, pie pans, Christmas decorations, or CDs to the outside of your window. This is what we have decided to do on our big picture windows on the front of our house, is that we hang mesh netting. We use deer netting attached to rods that are suspended on hooks on the outside of the window. The only bummer with it is when you want to do your bird photography, you're taking a picture through the mesh. But otherwise, it's great. I mean, I've got this chickadee, this chestnutback chickadee that like feeds on spiders all around the house, and it does it like every fall. And it knows that this mesh is here, so it will get like on the other side of the mesh, so in between the window and the mesh, and it'll just kind of go up the mesh. And you know, it's not panicking. It's because you know, it's been there before. So it's pretty interesting. You know, the birds that aren't familiar with it can get panicked if they get behind it, but that doesn't happen very often, and usually they are able to find their way out. So you can also string bird feathers about 8 inches apart on fishing line, and then hang the lines of feathers vertically across windows. This is one that is probably the most appealing aesthetically for people. And so this is kind of the one that I usually recommend. You want to cover food scraps with dirt or vegetation in compost piles, feed dogs or cats inside the house, and clean up dog poop. So we're going to switch over to critters now. And a big concern here is rats. You might have your own critter concerns, but that's kind of here, that's really our biggest one. So an invasive species is a non-native species whose presence decreases the biological diversity of the community that it comes into. And so starlings are really like one of the major birds that we're concerned about because they take critical cavity nests and they're very aggressive birds. It's one of the ones that we really need to be aware of, and we really need to not encourage them to continue to take up these cavity nests. So we need to figure out a way to stop them. So in rural areas, house sparrows compete with native birds for limited nesting cavities as well. They're also very aggressive birds, and they take up these spaces. And so we're going to talk way more about this in the next talk. But for now, you can exclude the house sparrow based on the diameter size of your nest box. And most nest boxes that you see sold have a hole that is too large that the house sparrow can get into. So it is something that you really need to be aware of when you're looking into nest boxes. So the house finch outcompetes its relative, the purple finch, in human altered settings. They're just very, very numerous. You want to baffle your nest box poles to protect them from egg and nestling predation. And you can see on this nest box that the hole size has been expanded. And so you can get hole protectors that's just a piece of wood with the right size hole, and you just put that over the top, and that's a way you can just take care of that issue. Raccoons will feed on bird food, wash their food hands in your bird bath, and eat eggs and nestlings. So you know, oftentimes they operate at night. During the summer, though, because our days are so long, at least around here, like I know they're around, and I see what they do at night too. So one way to isolate possible native nest predators from your yard installations is to provide them with habitat of their own. You know, that's sometimes kind of works. You know, it depends on yeah, what exactly you're dealing with. It is best though to kind of make spaces for them that are different from your songbirds. Although the jays are songbirds, but they are also love to eat eggs of other birds. So you want to make sure your feeders are high enough off the ground to stay out of the reach of deer. And bird baths can be made accessible for bees, butterflies, and other wildlife. And the information from this slideshow was directly sourced from the Washington Department of Wildlife, Bring Birds Back, Real Gardens Grow Natives, How to Create a Bird-Friendly Yard, and Birdwatchers Digest. And next time in part 2, we're going to talk about shelter in space. We're going to talk about snags and dead trees, which is one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about nest box design. We're going to talk about landscape planning, and we're going to talk about invasive plant species. All right.
Okay. All right. We're open for questions now.
I had a question. I was wondering if you had any suggestions for pigeons being a nuisance. Mostly they're ground feeding.
So they're a nuisance because they're ground feeding?
Yeah, they're a nuisance because they flock in 12 or 24, volumes of 12 or 24. And I'm living with them, but, they land on my roof, and, I just wondered, what your thoughts on pigeons were.
And you're not feeding the birds, or you are feeding the birds?
Yeah, I am feeding the birds. And so what I've done is I've tried everything. I've moved the feeder, and I've tried to hide the feeder. I've done everything. But now what I do is I feed for about 2 weeks until the pigeons become habituated. And then I pull the bird feeders down and pull them in for like 2 weeks, and the pigeons go away. And so on. So I'm kind of navigating the frequency of my feed in order to basically stop a pest problem.
That's a good idea.
And these are your like feral pigeons, your Eurasian collar doves. I mean, do you have any bandtail pigeons?
I don't believe so,
Okay.
but I'd have to be more scrutinous about who's out there.
Do they
I
have like kind of an iridescence to them?
some of them do. There is a mixture of, I have about 12 to 15, and they're in this neighborhood, but they love
And are
my,
you feeding like millet?
I'm
and,
feeding
like,
the Wild Bird stores chickadee chew, and I found that better than the no mess, because the no mess just flowed right through my feeders onto the ground, and it wasn't any mess, but they were getting a bunch of sunflower seeds. So so the chickadee chew seems to work best around minimizing the ground litter.
and are you chasing them out?
No, I've given up.
Oh,
I used
okay.
because I've been here about 4 years, and I've been living, so now my method is to decrease my frequency of seed feeding. But I just, so anyway, that was one question. I'll just live with it, but I think decreasing the frequency is the way to go.
Well, do you have a platform feeder where you can kind of, or something to catch the food before it gets to the ground?
No, it's two, caged cylinder feeders, but they are
Okay.
caged. So they are on the ground, the cages work.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you can keep the pigeons out if you have an enclosed space by size. So that's what I've done on the platform feeder, is just by running wires, and they're not perching birds, so they can't get in. Like the Steller's jay and other large birds, even a flicker, can get in because they're okay with cavities and tight spaces. But because the pigeons aren't perching birds, they can't really like perch and get in. So I've managed to exclude them, but I don't know how you would exclude them, except you'd have to stop the food from getting to the ground.
okay, so that might be an interesting idea. Go to a platform feeder, but have it enclosed with like chicken wire or something.
It's just, I don't know if I have a good picture in my slideshow. But if you could email me at tours@experienceolympic.com. I'll just put it in the chat. And
Yeah, no-
then I can definitely send you a good photo, because photos really tell a million words, so it'll just be a
Thank
lot easier.
Yeah, I might have to, that would be great.
And it was custom made, so I should say that, but it wouldn't be that hard to reproduce.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We've had another question about further suggestions for keeping starlings away, and you mentioned a type of feeder. What works? Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the starlings are really shy. I mean, they're kind of like the Eurasian collar doves as well. I mean, like actually the house sparrows are kind of the same. It's like they know that I don't want them there. So I'll often like knock on the window, and just try to make it really uncomfortable for them. And it's like the other birds know that I'm not even talking about them. So like the juncos won't even move, it's just so, I mean, you can't always be vigilant like that. But I think it does help at least a little bit especially if you have just a really savvy bird. I mean, and you might not be able to stop the savvy bird. But definitely the suet palace, which I got from Wild Birds, and I think they still have, which is essentially like an enclosed suet feeder. So it has small spaces. So similar to the platform feeder, except it excludes like, the sparrows. Nobody can get in that except the smaller birds. I think the song sparrow might be able to navigate to get inside. But maybe the juncos, because they can like watch what the other birds do, but I don't think anything bigger than that really. But it's mostly for chickadees and the warblers and the bush tits and nuthatches, and then the nuthatches and the ruby crowned kinglet and the woodpeckers, they can all hang on the bottom and get that, and usually the starlings can't do that, so it really does exclude the starlings. And the finch feeders, like your tube feeders, the starlings can't get on that. I mean, it's just the perch is too small, so they don't get on that either. And you do have to use pretty small food like thistle or very fine sunflower chips. So you have to use a really fine food in those tube feeders for the finches. But other birds can get to that too. I mean, the warblers will even go there. The chickadees will go there. Even some of the larger sparrows are able to balance. They watch the other birds and they can do it too.
Other questions?
Yeah, I had one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I have this nice feeder for finches with the little tiny seeds, and I put it out hanging in the yard, and finches don't go anywhere near it. Do they want a protected spot? Is that what they need? Or why aren't they eating the seeds?
Well, there's a couple of things. You're using the fine sunflower chips?
I'm not using chips at all. It's the
Thistle?
thistles, yes.
Thistle can have a lot of problems. It can have mold that you can't see. I have gotten away totally from using it because I can't see the mold, and it can have a lot of issues. So before doing anything else, I would make sure that the feeder's completely clean. So wash and dry it, make sure you don't have a source there. And then try the fine sunflower chips, try it in the location you're at. And also you want to get, like if you get it from Wild Birds, for example, they have the really nice plastic cover. So you want to make sure that you also have a plastic cover for it, because that's another way to, if too much moisture gets in there, you're going to get mold with the fine sunflower chips too.
Right.
And then see if that helps. And then if not, then I would try moving it in a different location.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
I have one more. I would like to plant a couple of small, like 15-foot trees in my front yard that are native and bird friendly. And I had an arborist who recommended a hawthorn and a snowbell, and I was just wondering what your opinion would be on do any particular species pop into your mind around what would be attractive as well as wild bird friendly?
Yeah, it's an open, sunny location.
Yes.
And I would definitely try the red flowering currant. I think that if you want to kind of see what that looks like, I mean that is one of the ones that horticulturally has of our native species, of our native like shrub species, has garnered the most interest. And I'm sure you can find that at the conservation district sale. And even my mom, who is very aesthetics oriented, like I've already given her now 4 red flowering currants.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're welcome.
that's super. I didn't even think of that. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked.
I was going to make a comment.
Go
With
ahead.
the conservation district sale, the one thing we've learned over the years, because we've ordered quite a bit from them, is to order early, because they do run out of the favorite things pretty fast. And it'll open up for ordering on November 1st. So the sooner you get on site and put your order in, the better chance you have of getting what you want. And the other comment I was going to make is on the window screen idea. This last year, because we have some large windows that have been bird problem before, is we did hang some netting, but we only put it 2/3 of the way down the window because we like to take pictures through these particular windows. And so that left us a camera spot and to get our shots, yet we had no bird strikes for the first time this year. So that netting worked really, really well. I highly recommend it. And anybody that wants to see it at my place, or I can get a picture of what we have. It was really good. It's still up.
Thanks so much, Steph.
I wanted to say one thing. The Pacific Rim Institute had their plant sale, their native plant sale a couple of weeks ago. So it's kind of over for the year, but we were able to get camas and chocolate lily and a pile of other really interesting stuff there. So look for it next year.
Well, they'll actually be offering some plants in the Conservation District sale. They're going to allow pre-ordering through the Conservation District, and we'll fill those orders in the February pickup. So it's
Cool.
not completely over yet.
Glad to hear it. Thank you.
I had
Oh.
another comment about native plants. There's the Washington Native Plant Society, the Salal chapter. If you belong to that, they're having their native plant sale. It's online this week, but you need to be a member to be part of the sale. But you just order online and then you pick it up later. But they have some really nice native plants too.
Thank you.
I have a comment. This is Sarah. Stephanie, I know that you had some handouts that you prepared, and I wondered how people can get them.
So Dave loaded them on the website. You have to go to the, Sarah, help me, what's it called? What's that tab? Stewardship or
I'm gonna look.
That's what it says in stewardship resources.
Okay, stewardship resources, and you go to that tab, and I believe the PDFs are right there. I don't have my main computer on, so I can't remember it visually, but there's and Carolyn's going to go into a little bit more of what I had Dave load up there. It's more directly related to landscaping itself. One, it has a chart of where to plant things in wet soil, dry soil, sunny, shade. And one is about the heights of the different things. And these are 2 bits of information I really wish that we had had when we started planting our native plants here, because I made some bad decisions not knowing. And we're going to have to move things around or make some changes because of that. Things didn't thrive. And so this would have been really, really helpful. And I think Carolyn's going to include a little bit of that in her next session.
I just looked for that the resources, and I missed it the other day because the top of the page, the first thing you see is native plant grants for birds. And so if you're not interested in the plant grants, you might think there's nothing there, but if you scroll down, there's links to all of these great handouts. So it's well worth looking for under the stewardship tab for native plants for birds.
Thank you, everybody.
I wanted to say something to Carolyn. This is Kathy Bauer. I just wanted to say thanks for mentioning a couple of times that the feeders are for our entertainment and that the native plants and the habitat obviously are for the birds. But when we bring them in closer, you know, a lot of times I run into people talking all the time about us feeding the birds, and they need us to feed them, and they really don't need us to feed them, but we sure like looking at them, and then we can bring them closer with the feeders and the bird baths near us. Thanks.
Thanks,
you.
Kathy.
And I'd like to make a comment about the bird strikes. And I had problems over the years with this. And then I put all my feeders I hang from the eaves of my house. So they're right next to the window. And I found that that really works because the birds have to slow down to get to the feeder. And if they get spooked, even if they hit the window, it's only like a foot away from the window. So they're rarely hurt at all. So I know that's probably not possible for everybody, but it's definitely worked for me.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point that I didn't bring up. So I'm glad you did, is that, often moving, if you're having a lot of problems, moving the feeders either closer or farther away is often
yeah.
a solution. Yeah.
30, I've heard 30 feet should be at least 30 feet away if you're gonna put them farther away, so.
Well, the guy that does our pest control, i.e. rats, said that 25 feet from the house was the best place for the bird feeders, because any closer than that encourages the rats to look under your house.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
One quick comment.
Sure.
Carolyn, you mentioned the Plantis Nativa nursery and that you picked some things up at their Mount Vernon location.
Yeah.
And according to their website, which I was at very recently, they have closed the Mount Vernon satellite location and apparently are just available now at Bellingham.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, that is a bummer. Well, thank you, Carolyn, for your presentation tonight, and we look forward to next week. It will be on October 21st at 7 o'clock. There will be no meeting beforehand, so that it should be able to be done in an hour with questions then, so it won't be quite as late as tonight. But we are really thankful that you're doing this, and everybody clap and say thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I love to see all of your yards in person. I'm sure you're doing a great job.
Well, great. And we'll see you next time. Let's see. Somebody wrote down the Small Rainy Day Flora Nursery in Langley has some very nice plants. I didn't know that, but that's interesting. So anyway, good night, and we'll see you next Thursday at 7 o'clock.
Good night.
Good night.
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 Thanks, Patty.
You bet. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.